To my wife, Anna, if you ever read this, know that every breath I took in that forest was for you. When the silence wrapped around me and I thought the world was done with me, it was your face I saw. It was your voice that made me crawl, bleed, and beg for life. I don't believe in luck anymore. I believe in love, in something bigger than instinct, something that outlasts even the terror of teeth sinking into bone. What happened in those woods didn't just try to end me. It taught me what kept me alive. You won't believe how this story ends, and I swear, even the hardest hearts will feel it. Because this isn't just about a man and a bear. It's about the moment something wild chose not to finish me. And the reason why might break you in ways you didn't expect. It was late September, the air already sharp enough to sting my lungs with each inhale. I was deep in the Chugach backcountry, 4 days into a solo elk hunt, with nothing but my rifle, my instincts, and the ghost of my father's voice in my head, reminding me to stay alert. The silence in those valleys wasn't absence, it was presence. A stillness so complete, it felt like the trees were holding their breath. I moved slowly, deliberately, checking the wind, keeping my scent downhill. It was my 3rd season in Alaska, and I'd learned to read the land like scripture. But even scripture has spaces between the lines where something ancient waits. That morning started clear and cold. A thin layer of frost crackled under my boots as I broke camp. The canvas of the sky stretched open in pale pinks and steel blues. I brewed coffee over the little titanium stove, the smell grounding me in something familiar. There was peace in that routine, checking gear, loading the pack, making my first notes in the logbook. I remember writing, "Elk moved east, wind good," feeling strong. That version of me, calm, confident, organized, had no idea how close he was to vanishing forever. The birds hadn't even started calling yet. I moved northeast toward the ridgeline, hoping to glass a bowl I'd scouted last spring. The terrain was rough but manageable, tundra breaking underfoot, dwarf birch brushing against my thighs. As I moved higher, I saw signs, fresh elk scat, a bedding area disturbed recently. My pulse quickened. I crouched down, adjusted my scope, scanned the draw. Nothing, just wind and whispering branches. Still, something buzzed at the edge of my awareness, like a wrong note in a song you know by heart. I paused, listened, waited. It started with a smell. Faint, musky, sour. Not elk, not moose, something heavier, older. I turned in a slow circle, senses open. Then came the sound, a single snap of underbrush, not far but not close enough to see. I froze. The forest around me was dense, and the visibility cut down by the morning mist rising off the earth. My hand tightened on the rifle stock. I took one cautious step toward the noise, thinking maybe it was a curious fox, maybe even a wolf. But the stillness afterwards said otherwise. I crouched low, heart beginning to drum. I didn't want to admit it yet, but I knew. Deep down, every hunter knows when he's not the one stalking anymore. The air gets thinner. Every sound feels like it was meant for you. I tried to back away, slowly, but then I saw it. Not the whole animal, just the movement. A shadow, massive and quiet, moving parallel to me through the trees. Not charging, watching, measuring. My throat dried instantly. It was a grizzly and it wasn't wandering. It was deciding. I thought maybe if I stood still, it would pass. Maybe it was just curious. I'd read about that. Encounters where the bear just moves on. But this one didn't. It circled slowly, silently, like it had all the time in the world. I couldn't hear its breathing, but I could feel it, like heat from a stove. I chambered around, not to fire, just to be ready. The metallic click seemed too loud, unnatural. That's when it stopped. Dead still, 50 yards away, just behind a stand of spruce. It stepped out slowly, and I'll never forget the way it looked at me. Not angry, not startled, just calm and full of purpose. Its coat was dark and matted from the wet undergrowth, muscles shifting beneath like water under ice. It was the size of a car, but what froze me wasn't the size, and it was the eyes. flat, dark, and ancient. Like it had seen men before, and none of them surprised it anymore. I knew then this wasn't about territory or hunger. This was something else. I raised the rifle, hands trembling, breath shallow. I aimed center mass, finger poised, but I couldn't shoot. Not yet. Not unless it charged. That's the rule. You wait unless it gives you no choice. My legs ached from holding position. Then the bear gave one low grunt and lunged forward 3 steps, fast enough to close half the distance in seconds. I fired. The shot cracked the silence. The bear flinched but didn't go down, didn't even slow. I tried to cycle another round, but the bolt jammed, mud or grit, I still don't know, and in that half-second of panic it was already on me. I remember the ground vanishing beneath me as its weight hit, the smell of wet fur and blood rushing up to meet me. Its paw came down, raking across my chest like fire. I screamed, not in fear, in instinct. Everything went red and roaring. I fought, not with the rifle, but with my hands, my voice, my will. It didn't matter, it was stronger, faster, endless. Then, in a moment that felt both like seconds and eternity, the bear stopped. Not completely. It loomed over me, huffing, paw raised, but it didn't strike. We stared at each other. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. Blood filled my mouth, and all I could think about was Anna, how I left without saying I love you that morning. That unbearable regret burned hotter than the pain. I whispered her name, just once. And somehow, the bear stepped back, not far, just enough. At first I thought I was hallucinating. Blood loss, shock, the brain's way of softening the end. But no, the grizzly held my gaze for a heartbeat longer, then turned its massive head and backed away, slow and deliberate, its eyes never leaving mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. My chest felt crushed, torn open. My left leg twitched without my permission, a muscle trying to escape what the rest of my body couldn't. The bear disappeared into the brush the same way it had arrived, like smoke. No panic, no sound, just gone. And I was left there, torn and alone in a place that no longer felt like earth. The silence returned, not the calm, serene kind I'd known before, but a ringing, hollow quiet that pressed against my ears like pressure at the bottom of the ocean. I don't remember screaming, but my throat felt raw. I think I called out to God or Anna or both. My hands shook as I pressed them to the wounds, trying to make sense of where the blood was coming from and how much of it I could afford to lose. My right side was shredded, ribs cracked, maybe broken. One eye swelled shut within minutes. I was still alive, but barely. Crawling felt like dying in pieces. Every movement scraped nerves raw. My left arm was mostly useless, shoulder dislocated, maybe more. So I dragged myself with my right, inch by inch, through the underbrush toward the last place I'd marked on my GPS. I didn't even have it on me. It had been torn from my pack. But I remembered. Memory was all I had. I thought about Anna's hands, the way they felt on my neck when she brushed past me in the morning. I thought about the laugh she made when she was trying not to cry. Those thoughts became my fuel. I don't know how long I crawled. Time twisted. I remember patches of light through the trees, birds watching silently, the taste of blood and pine needles in my mouth. I found my way to a slope and slid down more than I walked, crashing through saplings, dirt grinding into open wounds. When I finally reached the edge of the clearing where I'd first scouted elk sign that morning, I collapsed. There was a small game camera I'd mounted on a tree, and somehow I remembered that. I lay there, barely conscious, praying it would catch enough of me in frame that someone would find the footage later, some proof I had tried. By some impossible stroke of grace, my InReach Mini was still clipped to my belt. It took me 3 attempts to send an SOS. The blood on my fingers smeared the buttons and I couldn't see the screen through the swelling, but I hit it. I know I did. After that, I let go. Let the earth hold me. Let the trees close in. The pain became distant, like sound underwater. I remember a raven landing nearby, cocking its head. It didn't caw, just looked at me. For a moment, I thought it was death itself. But it didn't take me. I woke to voices, not in my head, real ones, distant at first, then closer. I tried to call out, but my throat gave only a rasp. A shadow passed over me, and I heard the sound of boots crunching frost. The first responder knelt beside me, swore under his breath, and called for immediate evac. I couldn't lift my head, but I caught a glimpse of his patch, Alaska Search and Rescue. He put a blanket over me, and in that moment, I didn't feel pain. Just relief. I was going to make it. I'd survived the bear. The helicopter came later, louder than I expected. I remember the rotor blades shaking the trees and someone lifting me onto a stretcher. Everything was white and noise, and hands holding mine. One of the medics kept asking me to stay awake, to focus. He asked me who I loved. I said, Anna. Just that. He nodded and told me to hold on. I remember the sound of Velcro, the straps tightening over my chest, and the sensation of rising, not just in the air, but out of something dark that had tried to bury me. In the hospital, they told me I'd lost over 2 liters of blood, 4 broken ribs, torn muscles in my shoulder and back, a partially collapsed lung, and deep lacerations across my side and thigh. But I was alive. Against every odd, I was alive. They said if I'd been found even 30 minutes later, I would have bled out. I remember lying there, unable to speak, and watching the ceiling blur. It was the first time in my life I'd truly felt small, not insignificant, but humbled, like a child who had just seen the world for what it really was. Anna flew in that night. When she walked into the room, I finally broke. I cried in a way I never had before, not from fear, not from pain, but from pure, unfiltered gratitude. She didn't say anything, just held me. Her touch grounded me more than morphine ever could. I whispered, "It stopped." The bear. "It stopped." She kissed my forehead and said, "Because you weren't alone." And I knew then I hadn't been. Not in the woods. Not ever. Something held that bear back. Something that couldn't be seen, only felt. Oh, ChatGPT, Disa. The days that followed were a blur of surgeries, monitors, and the dull beeping of machines that reminded me I was still tethered to this world. Every movement hurt. Every breath felt like dragging air through broken glass. But the pain wasn't the worst part. It was the quiet moments, lying awake at 3 a.m., when the bear returned in my mind. I'd see its eyes again, feel the weight of its body crashing into mine, smell the hot, sour breath. I'd flinch at shadows, tense at distant noises in the hallway. My body was healing, but my mind had been split open in ways the doctors couldn't see. The therapists called it PTSD. They talked to me about trauma, fight or flight, reprocessing, but they didn't understand. They hadn't looked into the eyes of something that should have killed them, and then didn't. It wasn't just terror I carried. It was the mystery. The question that haunted me most wasn't why it attacked, but why it stopped. Why didn't it finish me? I would lie in bed tracing the scars on my chest and ask myself the same question every night. Why did it let me go? The answer never came, not in words, just a quiet echo of that stare, that pause. Anna never left my side. She read to me when I couldn't sleep, brushed my hair back when I was too weak to lift my arms, and whispered things I didn't deserve to hear. She was my anchor, my mirror, the proof that the part of me worth saving hadn't been torn out in those woods. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling tiles, she said softly, "You know it stopped because you were already fighting for something. You didn't give up." That stuck with me. Maybe survival isn't just instinct. Maybe it's tied to love, to what we carry with us when everything else is stripped away. After discharge, recovery became a different kind of battle. The world outside the hospital felt too bright, Too loud, too indifferent. My limbs didn't work the way they used to. I had to relearn basic movements, sitting, standing, walking without leaning on someone. But worse was the silence when I was alone. The way I'd freeze at the sound of a branch cracking outside. The way the air could turn electric if I caught the scent of wet earth. Sometimes I'd wake up shouting, drenched in sweat, sure that the bear was back, even though I was hundreds of miles from that forest. A few months later, I returned to the site. I had to. Not to prove anything, to anyone or myself, but because something in me needed to see it again. The trees hadn't moved, the brush had regrown. But I found the place, the exact spot, by feel. My boot prints were long gone, but the memory of that morning was etched into every inch of ground. I stood where it had stepped out, where I had raised my rifle. I closed my eyes and let the moment return. Not to relive the fear, but to meet it differently, with open hands. I left something there. A small carved figure Anna had made me years ago, a bear curled around a human heart. I placed it at the base of the spruce and whispered, "Thank you." Not because I forgave it. Not because I understood it, but because I was still here, and that meant something. It meant the story didn't end in blood. It meant there was more. As I turned to leave, I swear I felt it again, that presence. Not behind me, but around me. Like the forest itself had exhaled. Weeks passed. I began to write, not just about the attack, but about the feelings that lived beneath it. Helplessness, awe, connection. My story spread online. Hunters wrote to me. So did survivors, trauma counselors, even park rangers. One man said, "You helped me face what I ran from." Another wrote, "I cried, and I don't cry." That's when I realized something. The bear didn't just spare me. It handed me a responsibility to tell the truth, to carry the weight of that moment not as a wound, but as a torch. In time, I started visiting schools and wilderness programs, talking about predator behavior, survival tactics, but always returning to the moment it stopped. I never said I had the answer. I just told them how it felt to be seen by something ancient, something wild, and walk away. I told them what it did to a man's sense of self, and I told them about Anna, how love, not strength, was the thing that made me crawl through the dirt and press that SOS button. That survival was never about muscle. It was about memory, connection, meaning. That spring, I started building a small retreat center outside Talkeetna, a place where trauma survivors could reconnect with nature safely. We called it Stillwater. On the gate, there's a metal carving of a grizzly and a human, standing at opposite ends of a clearing, both watching, neither moving. I didn't want to conquer the fear. I wanted to live with it, to make peace with it. Some days are harder than others. But every day, I wake up breathing as a day I remember what I almost lost. Because that day, in the frozen breath of the Alaskan wild, I met something bigger than death. And it didn't take me. It left me with scars, yes, but also with a truth that runs deeper than fear. That day, the bear didn't just tear into my flesh. It opened my life to something I never saw coming. And in that moment, I didn't just survive. I changed. Forever. People often ask me if I hate the bear, if I wish I'd killed it when I had the chance. I don't. That's the strange part. I never felt anger toward it, not even once. Fear, yes. Pain, of course, but not hatred. The bear did what it was built to do. It didn't hunt me out of malice. It responded to something ancient, something deeper than logic. And in a way I still don't fully understand, it chose to stop. That's not something I can hate. That's something I have to respect. There's a piece of that moment that still lives inside me. When I close my eyes, I sometimes feel the heat of its breath again, not in terror, but in clarity. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you've already fallen. But somehow, you're still standing. I think it changed my relationship with the world. I no longer move through the woods thinking I'm in control. I walk with reverence, with a different kind of silence, one that listens more than it speaks. I started recording audio diaries during hikes, not for anyone else, just for myself. I'd speak about what I saw, how I felt, how my body still flinched at sudden wind shifts or animal tracks too large for comfort. Over time, those recordings became a map, not of the land, but of my healing. Every mile I walked was a mile farther from the blood-soaked ground of that September day, but also a step closer to it in understanding. I stopped running from it. I began walking toward it, with open eyes. Anna told me once, "You're not the man you were before the bear." She said it with love, not regret. She said it like someone who watched me leave and never expected me to come back the same. And she was right. The man I was back then was strong in body, but blind to something bigger. He believed preparation was enough, that control was possible. But the man who came back knows different. He knows nature is not a thing to conquer. It's a thing to be humbled by, and sometimes forgiven by. One winter night I had a dream. I was in the same forest, same mist, same cold, but this time I wasn't armed. I stood in the clearing with nothing but my breath and the sound of trees swaying above me. And then the bear came. Not charging, not stalking, just walking. We stood across from each other. I didn't move. I didn't fear. I simply nodded, and it nodded back. That's when I woke up. I didn't tell Anna. I didn't write it down. But I felt something release in me that morning, like the last piece had shifted into place. A year after the attack, I returned to Stillwater alone. Snow covered most of the trails, but I knew the path by heart. I walked slowly, letting the cold bite my face, my lungs. I stopped at the tree where I'd left the carved figure. It was still there, weathered but intact. I knelt beside it and placed a new one beside it. A human hand and a bear paw, side by side, not touching. I didn't say anything. I just let the moment be. The wind moved through the trees like a breath. When I stood and turned to go, I saw something just beyond the rise. Far off, a shape, low and dark, moving slowly across the ridgeline. Too far to be sure, but part of me knew. I didn't feel panic. I didn't freeze. I just stood there and watched until it disappeared into the trees. Maybe it was just another bear. Maybe it was the bear. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a memory, a shadow, a sign. Whatever it was, it left me with peace. I used to think survival was the end of the story, that crawling out of that forest was the final chapter. But I was wrong. Survival was just the beginning. The true story started when I asked why, when I leaned into the unknown, into the fear, into the mystery that wild things carry in their bones. And in that asking, I found something more powerful than answers. I found meaning. I found purpose. I found the quiet strength that love had planted in me long before the bear ever came. I'll never forget the pain, or the fear, or the sound of my ribs cracking under the weight of something unstoppable. But more than that, I'll never forget the stillness that came after, the moment of grace in a place where grace didn't belong. Because that day, the bear didn't just let me live, it gave me a second life. One shaped not by the teeth that tore me, but by the love that held me together. That day, the grizzly didn't just leave a scar on my body, it carved a truth into my soul.